The Darkest Hour is often lauded as one of the best books, not just in the first arc, but in the series entire, even after dozens and dozens of other books have come out to rival it. And I must agree that it is an emotionally engrossing and action-packed story. It's not perfect, and I don't think any Warriors book is, but it's certainly one of the best books in the first arc, if not the series. The Darkest Hour was released on October 5th of 2004, 4 months after A Dangerous Path. Cherith wrote this book as well, meaning that the first arc ended up being equally divided between the two ghostwriters of the time. I will say, in many ways, this book redeems Cherith for any foul we might have given her based on A Dangerous Path. It has a consistent train of action along with some emotion, and gives a satisfying conclusion to the first arc of Warriors, with one possible exception. But that exception had nothing to do with what choices Cherith had to make in the writing of the story, and she executed the last-minute switch with grace, although it certainly has its flaws, so let's begin with one of its biggest, division of book time. Looking at the top 10 cats, they do have 73% of the lines, which is a nice percentage. However, the vast majority of those lines in the top 10 come from Firestar alone. Throughout the arc, he's had around 400 to 600 lines in each book. That is a lot, considering most other cats got around 4 to 20 lines. However, previous books were still balanced better, since at least the other cats with Firestar in the top 10 had reasonably large numbers of lines. In each previous book, there were 3 to 5 other cats who also had more than 100 lines. In The Darkest Hour, Firestar is the only cat in the book to have more than 100 lines, and it isn't even close. Greystripe speaks 76 times, Whitestorm, Tigerstar, Cinderpelt, and Sandstorm each have line counts in the 50s, and no other cat in the book can even get 40 lines. The first arc as a whole has always had an issue incorporating its supporting and background casts with a level of depth even close to Fireheart, but this book takes the cake in that regard. Each cat in this book, putting aside Firestar, is here to serve one function as a wrap-up to their arc, and outside of that one purpose, they step aside so Firestar can take all of the spotlight. This is very much his book, more than any other. It tells his story, and everything else is secondary. This also explains a bit of our she-cat problem in this book. 44% of the cast is female, but here they only have 20% of the lines, which is insane. None of the first arc books have been particularly good at giving she-cat screen time, but this book, for 2 reasons, is easily the worst. First, there's the problem I already mentioned, with Firestar taking up almost all of the spotlight. Firestar is a Tom, so of course his overwhelming presence would result in a smaller percentage of lines for the she-cats. But also, the first arc only ever had 4 she-cats who had substantial presences consistently through multiple books: Bluestar, Yellowfang, Cinderpelt, and Sandstorm. By The Darkest Hour, the former 2 have died, and the latter 2 aren't given much to do this book. Cinderpelt is here to be Medicine Cat. Sandstorm is here to be Mate. That is all. And, as always, the wider cast of characters is still tilted in the Tom's favor, with cats like Bramblepaw, Cloudtail, Ravenpaw, Tallstar, Darkstripe, Barley, and even Scourge all being given relatively large amounts of attention, for this book anyway, while only Mistyfoot, Bluestar, and Leopardstar even come close to reaching their level. But this will be more important when I do a complete comprehensive look back on the first arc. For now, let's speed through the Allegiances updates and begin with the story. Fireheart is now Firestar, leader of ThunderClan since Bluestar has died. Along with that, Whitestorm is now the deputy. Despite Whitestorm being moved out of the Warriors section, with Cloudtail becoming a warrior and Goldenflower moving out of the nursery, the Warriors count increased from 9 to 10. Interestingly, Lostface, despite having some version of a warrior name, is listed with the apprentices. Because of this, and with Bramblepaw and Tawnypaw as new apprentices, the apprentice count stayed constant with 6 cats. Goldenflower moving into the Warrior's Den and Speckletail moving into the Elder's Den has left Willowpelt as the only queen, and there are now 4 elders rather than 3. Alright, now let's begin The Darkest Hour. After a brief prologue setting up the dynamic and partnership between Tigerstar, Boulder, and some members of a group in the Two-Leg Place, Scourge and Bone, we return to Fireheart still trying to process Bluestar's death. Letting Stonefur and Mistyfoot stay for a while to mourn their mother, despite the clan's disapproval, and meeting his clanmates one by one to tell them what happened. Not just at her death, but in her past, with her kits. They bury Bluestar's body, and Cinderpelt and Fireheart go to get the new leader his 9 lives from noteworthy cats in his life who have died. In order, they were Lionheart with the life of courage, Redtail with the life of justice, Silverstream with the life of loyalty to what you know to be right, Running Wind with the life of tireless energy, Brindleface with the life of protection, Swiftpaw with the life of mentoring, Yellowfang with the life of compassion, Spottedleaf with the life of love, and Bluestar with the life of nobility, certainty, and faith. Just as they are celebrating Firestar's new position, though, he is given a vision of a pile of bones with rivers of blood flowing out of it, along with the prophecy 4 will become 2, lion and tiger will meet in battle, and blood will rule the forest. As soon as he gets back, he checks in with Whitestorm to learn what happened in camp, reassures Sandstorm that being a leader doesn't stop him from loving her, and gets told by Graystripe that he doesn't need to be deputy, and then goes to decide who should be deputy himself. He first considers Sandstorm, partially because she's an extremely talented and loyal warrior who even just before he made his decision was ready to create patrols and take up the duties of a deputy, but mostly because it would show her he loves her. But he decides against it since she hasn't had an apprentice, and whose fault is that? But he convinces himself that it's okay because Whitestorm would be a far better deputy than even her. Whitestorm is appointed, and Firestar leaves him in charge while he visits Princess and has a quick chat with Bramblepaw while there. Darkstripe poisons Sorrelkit, but since only Graystripe witnessed it, they need to wait for her to wake up to confirm what happened before they can exile him justly, sending him to Tigerstar and ShadowClan and leaving Firestar to give Fernpaw a new mentor, Longtail. I will give him the benefit of the doubt here and say that he wanted Sandstorm to fully train an apprentice rather than finishing out the last moon. But still, thin ice, sir. Even before the verdict, every cat in camp started mistrusting and avoiding Darkstripe, even Dustpelt, who was once his apprentice. Thornpaw is made Thornclaw, and Lostface, with the harsh recommendation of Cloudtail and a ceremony from One Eye, is given the name Brightheart instead. During Thornpaw's assessment, he sended some rogues he hadn't smelled before, but they were too old and faint to follow. Firestar does, however, react as a leader should, and tells the patrols to keep a lookout. Mistyfoot alerts him that Tigerstar and Leopardstar have been regularly meeting, and soon it's time for the gathering. Tallstar welcomes Firestar as a leader, and Firestar almost confides in him his suspicions about Tigerstar's plans before they are cut off by ShadowClan and RiverClan bursting in together, and Tigerstar announcing the creation of TigerClan, which he invites Tallstar and Firestar to join. Tallstar refuses at first, and Firestar soon does as well. Firestar then launches into a story about Tigerstar's past for the whole gathering, but this is cut off by a bolt of lightning, which is declared a sign from StarClan and causes the gathering to end. Firestar trains Bramblepaw using far more patience and praise than ever before, and checks in on Brightheart, who is learning new moves that she can use to fight despite her missing eye. During a hunting session, Firestar sees a lion in place of his reflection in the river, and Spottedleaf comes to tell him to remember what he has seen, and learn what he must be. Smallear gets unreasonably mad at Tawnypaw, who seems fed up with her treatment and soon leaves to join ShadowClan instead. Graystripe gets worried about his kits in RiverClan, so after a rational talk about how best to proceed, he, Firestar, and Ravenpaw go into RiverClan to check on them in secret. There they find the grotesque TigerClan camp, with a bone hill as their high rock, a rank odor everywhere, and the half-clan cats locked up in a guarded cave. Tigerstar and Leopardstar secondarily order Stoneford to kill Featherpaw and Stormpaw to prove his loyalty, but he refuses, so he is killed instead by Darkstripe and Blackfoot. As soon as Tigerstar spares Featherpaw and Stormpaw's lives another day, the Fire-Grey Raven trio set off and rescue them, and Mistyfoot, bringing them to ThunderClan. Graystripe is made into Stormpaw's new mentor, and Firestar gets the idea to ask WindClan for help just before Mudclaw burst in, asking for ThunderClan's help with a TigerClan attack on WindClan's camp. The battle is already over, though, with Gorsepaw killed by Tigerstar and One Whisker greatly injured. Tallstar and Firestar agree to meet Tigerstar at Fortrees the following morning as requested, but also agree not to join TigerClan and instead to stand together and fight. After saying I love you to Sandstorm and preparing the clan, they make their way to Fortrees, where they learn Tawnypaw has joined her father willingly, and Bramblepaw rejects him completely, being willing to die if it means being loyal to ThunderClan. Then, however, Tigerstar reveals his other allies, BloodClan, the rogues Thornpaw scented earlier. These cats don't answer to Tigerstar, though. They answer to their own leader, Scourge, a cat we are finally meeting in Chapter 22 of this final book. Firestar finally tells every cat, Scourge included, Tigerstar's story, and Scourge decides not to fight, and instead to kill Tigerstar, slitting his stomach and letting all 9 of his lives slowly, painfully drain away. Scourge then declares that BloodClan will take over this land, giving them 3 days to agree or face BloodClan, and Firestar has a completely new and unexpected force to fight. Firestar brings ThunderClan, WindClan, and after some tense discussion, RiverClan and ShadowClan as well, together under the mantle of Lionclan. Ravenpaw and Barley join too, and the latter, admitting he was a member of BloodClan, tells Firestar Scourge's weakness, his lack of belief in StarClan or the Warrior Code. We check in with every cat from Brightheart to Swirlkit to Princess to Whitestorm before the battle in a truly heartwarming series of scenes, and then it is time. United as one, the clans fight BloodClan. Darkstripe and Jaggedtooth joined BloodClan. Greystripe kills Darkstripe, Bone kills Whitestorm, and Firestar names Greystripe as the new deputy mid-battle. Something I will choose to forgive momentarily, since he didn't have time to think about it. And all the apprentices avenge Whitestorm by killing Bone. Scourge takes one of Firestar's lives, and while in StarClan, Bluestar tells him that there were always 5 clans. The significance of which is currently unclear, but assumed to be talking about StarClan beside the 4 clans. When Firestar returns, feeling the spirits of the cats who gave him his 9 lives beside him, he attacks with far more speed and strength than before, and kills Scourge, sending BloodClan fleeing terrified from the forest. The forest is saved. TigerClan splits up, and Mistyfoot is named RiverClan's new deputy, and Firestar stands victorious beside Greystripe and Sandstorm, with Spottedleaf still whispering in his ear. The early chapters explain that cats cannot talk at all once they enter Mothermouth for a leader ceremony, and even the medicine cat they go with doesn't know what happens during the ceremony. They can get a few sensations, like the smell of blood, but otherwise it is a private event between the new leader and StarClan. This is similar to the way they treated Cinderpaw's first introduction with StarClan, as a mystical event that couldn't ever be shared or explained. Now, we should probably discuss the book's portrayal of Leopardstar and Blackfoot, as both cats' morality will be discussed at length later in the series. Blackfoot follows his leader without question, and guides TigerClan in their hatred of half-clan cats. He taunts Darkstripe's inability to kill Stonefur, and, when ordered to, immediately does so himself. Even after the battle is done, there is no indication that he regrets his actions. There is also no indication of stupidity. He was completely on board with their actions. Leopardstar, meanwhile, does hesitate to persecute her own clanmates, but she is not under threat or duress when she decides to order Stonefur to kill the apprentices. And it was her idea in the first place to invite Tigerstar into her clan. By the level of power Tigerstar's criticism displays over her, it's possible that some underlying beliefs or long-standing manipulation led to these thoughts. But it took place entirely off-screen if that's what happened, and what we do see is her consistently choosing to destroy her clan for whatever reason. Considering Blackfoot's characterization here was butchered in his recent novella, and Leopardstar has a super edition coming out soon, I encourage you to remember this. For a lighter note, Bramblepaw. Firestar is finally confronted by Bramblepaw with his prejudice, especially considering he's mistrusted for his kitty pet roots. They both have pasts that lead their loyalties to be questioned, and they both chose ThunderClan regardless. Firestar finally notices how similar Bramblepaw is to him rather than to Tigerstar, and invites him into his life. This is exceptionally sweet, and it works as much for the basis of Bramblepaw's character and as a conclusion to Firestar's paranoia that began in Forest of Secrets and became intolerable in a dangerous path. Their relationship from then on is far better. Even when Bramblepaw outright asks why they shouldn't join TigerClan, Firestar gives him a calm, rational answer, and Bramblepaw understands. Then, of course, his shining moment comes when, even knowing his sister left, he rejects Tigerstar and stands by ThunderClan, proving his undying loyalty and bravery. And soon after, where he comes to Fireheart with his grief over Tawnypaw's absence and Tigerstar's death, exposes his vulnerability to the mentor he has come to trust. I really wish he'd stayed like this forever. On to Scourge. Vicky Holmes has since confirmed that the original intention for the series was for Firestar and Tigerstar to face off in a final battle, likely similar to what we got at the end of The Last Hope in Omen of the Stars. However, after a continued recommendation from a colleague, they decided to switch it to a last-minute new villain, who would kill Tigerstar and make Firestar and perhaps us feel bad for the evil cat we'd been rooting against for 5.5 books. What happened afterwards was still a grand and impactful battle, but it was built on a villain who had very little time, even in this book, to build up his emotional relevance. Whether or not this twist works for you is probably dependent on whether you put more value in the emotions of Tigerstar's death or the satisfaction of completing the story the arc spent so much time building up. However, one thing about him is undeniably fishy. Barley says that without the Warrior Code, Firestar could have ended up just like Scourge, and the whole ending of the book really pushes a parallel between them. But this isn't a strong comparison at all. Even if Firestar had stayed in the two-leg place forever, I can guarantee he wouldn't have turned out like the bloodthirsty, heartless cat Scourge is shown to be. And Firestar has broken the Warrior Code himself plenty of times since joining the clans, yet he turned into a strong and compassionate cat. The literal difference in their leaderships through the power StarClan gives Firestar is just about all that truly exists. Scourge is an obstacle and maybe a foil, but not a reflection. And putting that all aside, I'd like to end off with a speech from Bluestar that might just be the most impactful thing this book has to say for the series moving forward. StarClan doesn't control everything. They send signs, but do not interfere. Tigerstar and Scourge made their own decisions, and Firestar can too. Living cats are not the playthings of StarClan. If they were, would they truly be free? She asks rhetorically. That's a great question, Bluestar. Since you guys care so much about cats living their own lives and making their own choices, I'll hold you to that. The first arc isn't perfect, but it's a neat little story with engrossing action and emotional moments, along with plenty of characters to get attached to. At times, the supporting cast, especially the she-cats, are pushed aside, and Fireheart does sometimes take a detour to be stupid or a jerk at random. But overall, it is clear why so many people got drawn into the series from these books. The Darkest Hour especially does hold up as a great book, and I'm almost sorry to finish writing this and leave the arc behind. But we are far from done, and in the next episode, I'll get on to the next arc, The New Prophecy, as we continue on in our trip through time.